He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but a Rottweiler doesn't need a why. That's kind of the point. Everybody says the same thing about Rottweilers. They're loyal. They die for you. They love their owner so much, they'll put their body between you and a threat without thinking twice. It's the go-to explanation, repeated in comment sections and dog park conversations like it's settled science. Loyalty, love, devotion. It's not that. Rottweil is a town in southern Germany, and Rottweilers descend from Roman cattle-driving dogs left behind after the empire pulled out of the region centuries ago. Butchers in the area kept breeding them because they needed something that could move an angry, half-ton animal through narrow streets without getting gored. Later, the same butchers strapped coin purses to the dog's collars on the way to market, betting nobody would try to rob a dog that outweighed most men. That's the actual origin story. So where did the loyalty myth come from? Mostly from people watching the output and guessing at the cause. A dog that stands its ground when a stranger walks up looks like devotion from the outside. It reads as love because that's the frame humans default to. We assume the dog is doing it for us. But intent and effect aren't the same thing, and nobody bothered separating them for about 100 years. Add in a few decades of movies where the big black and tan dog is either a monster or a martyr, nothing in between, and you've got a breed permanently stuck between two cartoons instead of being understood as an actual animal. Here's where the myth actually falls apart. The American Temperament Test Society has run standardized tests on tens of thousands of dogs across breeds for decades, and Rottweilers consistently pass at rates around 85%, which sounds reassuring until you look at what's being measured. The test isn't checking whether the dog loves its owner. It's checking whether the dog reacts to a stranger, a gunshot, an umbrella popping open, with controlled confidence instead of panic. That's temperament stability. It has nothing to do with affection, and conflating the two is how you end up with owners who genuinely believe their dog is protecting them out of gratitude. What's actually driving the protection isn't love, it's threshold. Rottweilers were bred over centuries to have an unusually high tolerance for confrontation and an unusually low tolerance for perceived intrusion into their space. Combine those two things and you get a dog that doesn't back down from tension the way a golden retriever would. It's not choosing you over the stranger out of loyalty. It's running a threat calculation, and the math just happens to land in your favor because you're inside its territory and the stranger isn't. Swap the roles. Make you the unfamiliar variable in a space the dog considers its own, and the calculation doesn't care who signs your paycheck. A woman in Erie kept a Rottweiler named Bruno for 11 years. Total sweetheart around the family. Slept at the foot of her daughter's bed every night. Then her nephew came over for Thanksgiving, reached down too fast to grab a dropped fork under the table, and Bruno bit him hard enough to need 14 stitches and a $2,200 emergency room bill. Nothing about that moment involved hatred or betrayal. Bruno wasn't confused about who he loved. He read a fast movement near a resource, food in this case, as an intrusion, and his threshold for tolerating that kind of intrusion is just lower than a Labrador's. The protective instinct and the dangerous instinct are the exact same circuit. I used to think you could train that gap away completely. I don't think that anymore. You can manage it, you can shrink it, you can make the dog dramatically safer through socialization and controlled exposure starting before 12 weeks old. But the underlying wiring doesn't disappear because you did 6 months of obedience classes. Insurance companies figured this out decades before dog owners did, which is why Rottweilers still show up on breed restriction lists at property insurers across half the country, right next to breeds people actually consider aggressive. There's another layer to this that most breed videos skip entirely, and it's the part that actually makes owners uncomfortable. Guard behavior in a Rottweiler isn't a single switch. It's closer to a stack of separate triggers that happen to fire together often enough that people mistake them for one instinct. Territorial defense is one trigger. Resource guarding is a second, completely different one. Startle response to sudden movement is a third. A properly bred, well-socialized Rottweiler can have all three dialed way down, and still, on one bad Tuesday, have all three stack at once. A stranger at the door, right as the dog is eating, right as a kid runs past too fast, and produce a reaction that looks nothing like the dog's baseline behavior. Owners describe it afterward the same way every time. He's never done that before. He didn't do it before because the stack never lined up before. That's not the same as it being impossible. This is also where I'll pick a fight with half the trainers on YouTube. There's a whole cottage industry built around teaching Rottweiler owners dominance, alpha roles, forced eye contact, physically pinning the dog until it goes limp, all sold as bonding with your protector. It's nonsense, and it's the exact opposite of what actually lowers bite risk. A dog that's being physically dominated on a regular basis doesn't learn to trust its owner more. It learns that unpredictable pressure can arrive at any moment from the one source it's supposed to be able to read clearly. That raises baseline stress, not confidence, and stressed dogs sit closer to their threshold, not farther from it. The trainers selling this stuff aren't reducing the scary version of the breed. They're manufacturing it, one paid session at a time, and charging premium rates to do it. I've seen packages go for $150 an hour for exactly this kind of obedience. The actual research on bite prevention points somewhere almost boring by comparison. Early, repeated, low-stakes exposure to strangers, kids, sudden noises, and other animals, done calmly enough that the dog's baseline arousal never spikes in the first place. No dominance required, no leadership rituals, just a nervous system that's been shown over and over that new stimuli aren't automatically threats. It works. It's also slower and less dramatic than an alpha roll video, which is probably why it doesn't get the views. There's a piece of this nobody fully understands yet either, and I'll just say it plainly instead of pretending otherwise. Researchers can measure elevated baseline cortisol in certain guardian-type breeds compared to more sociable ones. And there's a reasonable theory that chronic low-grade vigilance, not affection, vigilance, is what produces behavior that looks like protectiveness from the outside. A dog running slightly hot on stress hormones all the time is a dog that's always half scanning the room, which from a distance looks exactly like devotion. But nobody's nailed down exactly how much of that is genetics versus environment versus the individual dog. And anyone who tells you they've got it fully mapped is selling something. I'll admit my own bias here too, since I'd be lying if I said this was purely academic for me. I grew up 2 houses down from a Rottweiler named Otto, who used to walk the fence line every time I rode my bike past. Dead silent, just tracking. Never barked once in 6 years. I decided as a kid that meant he liked me, that we had an understanding. Looking back with everything above in mind, Otto probably just filed me under known low priority, the same way he'd have filed a mail carrier who showed up at the same time every day for years. That's not nothing, but it's not the movie version either. People bring up bite force a lot in these conversations, usually to settle an argument about which breed is scariest. And it's worth saying plainly that it's mostly beside the point here. A Rottweiler's bite lands somewhere around 328 pounds per square inch by most published measurements, which sounds enormous until you notice a Labrador isn't dramatically behind it, and nobody's out here breed banning Labradors. The number that actually predicts outcomes isn't how hard the jaw closes. It's how often and under what conditions the dog decides to close it in the first place. 2 dogs with identical jaw strength produce completely different injury statistics if one has a threshold 3 times lower than the other. Focusing on bite force is like judging how dangerous a car is by how heavy it is, instead of asking who's driving and how fast. Here's the part that actually unsettles me. If the mechanism is threat threshold and not love, then the dog protecting you today has no built-in guarantee it recognizes you as safe tomorrow. Change the context enough. Sudden illness, a new baby crying at 3 a.m., a stranger's scent on your clothes after a long trip, even just the dog aging into joint pain that makes normal handling feel like a threat, and the same dog running the same threat calculation can land on a different answer. That's not a betrayal. The dog was never promising anything. We were the ones who decided to call territorial threshold management love, because the alternative is admitting we don't fully understand what's going on behind those eyes. Owning one of these dogs, then, isn't owning a bodyguard who adores you. It's living with a very good calculator that happens to be running numbers in your favor most of the time, for reasons that have almost nothing to do with how it feels about you. Every Rottweiler owner I've ever talked to eventually says some version of the same sentence, usually a few years in, usually a little quieter than the rest of the conversation. I don't fully know what's going on in there. Neither do I. Neither does anyone selling you a training package that claims otherwise. Otto's been gone a long time now. I still think about that fence line more than I'd admit to most people.